So here we are, The Krotons, a serial which nobody really talks about, but is notable for its writer. It's not especially interesting, and perhaps a bit too silly, but is there something overlooked about this serial? Or is it as pointless as it first seems? Let's find out and get into The Krotons. So we begin on an unnamed planet, home to the Gonds, a race who act as somewhat of a secondary species to the unseen Krotons, who have given them limited technology and teaching to evolve their race after the planet was devastated during an ancient war between the two races. So this is an interesting dynamic they have, as the Krotons never reveal themselves, but they now and again take two Gonds from their classes to meet with them, described as becoming one with the Krotons. The serial begins here, with two being selected and Farah trying to stop them from going as no one ever returns. It's an interesting hook for the serial, although it doesn't take long to reveal what happened to the Gonds. That being that they were sent into the wasteland and their bodies vaporised. This is only discovered when the Doctor, Jamie and Zoe stumble upon the exit and later save Varna, who's the one that Farna didn't want to become one with the Krotons. So this is a good start to the serial as it sets up everything well, giving us a small look into the Gond society and teasing the Krotons but not revealing anything about them. But from there the serial never really becomes anything interesting, with the serial slowly revealing details about the Krotons and building up to their reveal when the Doctor and Zoe become one with the Krotons, after Zoe uses one of the teaching machines out of curiosity. This scene does give us one of the most interesting things about the Krotons regime, that being that they're able to affect the minds of people, with them using their machines to make them feel pleased with them. This is a bit of a throwaway line, but it's one of those ideas that I think really helps to create this divide between those who worship and obey the Krotons and those who don't trust them. The reason I think this works is because those who are essentially being pacified by the drugs would be less likely to see the Krotons for who they are, and since the effect only happens when they do well, then it's possible that a lot of the people who rebel aren't the best performing. So let's talk about the Gonds and what's left of their society. So we don't know much about the Gonds from before the arrival of the Krotons, although there was a conflict started by the Krotons, who have made the modern day Gonds think that it was their people. Of course, as we later discover, these are the same Krotons, which makes the fact that they've been lying about their history more interesting, as they were the ones who caused these events all that time ago. So having the Gonds as the species that is being used presumably has some meaning to it, as this serial feels like it's about something but I'm not sure what. More than likely it's just about slavery and that people should think for themselves instead of just doing what they're being told by God like beings who rule. If that's what it's about, then that's fair enough, and the Gonds work well in this role, as a race who are stuck in this position, where they are unable to escape from the slavery. Although plot-wise, this is very close to a lot of the rebel-based stories which we've seen over the past few years, and so it doesn't really stand out because of that. The Gonds are quite similar, as they are basically completely forgettable, with the only somewhat memorable ones being Elek, Beta, and Selris, although I both had to check their names, and in case of the first two, I mostly remember them due to their actors, with Philip Maddock playing Elek, while Beta was played by James Cairncross, who had previously played LeMaitre in The Reign of Terror, although Beta does stand out a bit more for being the only one who is really interested in expanding the knowledge of the Gonds through science. Selris is the most prominent, which is why he is memorable, but being on screen the most isn't the best reason for being memorable. He is the father of Farah, but that really doesn't feel that important in the grand scheme of things, as the two don't really have much of a dynamic as family members. In fact, I kind of forgot they were even related because of this. Tara has a stronger relationship with Varna, but even then they don't have a strong bond, as Varna spends most of the serial unconscious after being saved from the acid jets. She's not even a damsel in distress and just there. She might as well have been dead. Now let's talk about the Krotons, who are more interesting but not by much. So I've already gone over the history of the two races, so I'll focus on their motivations and how they function in the serial. So the Krotons have been for generations taking the smartest Gonds so that they can extract their mental power for their own uses. What these uses are revealed quite late into the serial. So the Gonds are needed for two reasons. They use many simply for power to keep themselves and their ship functioning, but require two high brains that have a high enough level of mental power so that they are capable of being used to fly the ship, which is called a dynotrope, as it requires 4 pilots but there are only 2 Krotons left. Obviously these two high brains end up being the Doctor and Zoe, due to them being on a whole other level of intelligence, with their presence leading to the reveal of the Krotons. This being from a form of stasis where they exist as a liquid state. So the Krotons have two exploitable weaknesses in the serial. The first being they need a constant supply of the liquid they exist in when in stasis, and the other being that they're blind in light, with a need for direction to be given from their ship. The former is the most important, as it's how Zoe defeats them by poisoning the liquid with sulfuric acid, but the blindness is only used once, and that's by Jamie by complete accident when he fails to destroy one of the Krotons. Design-wise they're very unique as they're clearly robotic in appearance, but look nothing like other robots we've seen in the show before, which means they do stand out for that reason. But a notable design doesn't make them memorable, with them being rather flat characters, having little in terms of character which would make them stand out against other robotic villains. Now yes, the fact they're able to exist as a liquid state is interesting, but it's one of those ideas which isn't explored that much by the story. It's like with everything else about the Krotons, it isn't anything too memorable. Let's talk about the trio, starting with Jamie, who is the least well used. So being up against villains who are very intelligent isn't the best matchup for Jamie, as it doesn't play to his strengths. He spends a decent chunk of the serial looking after Varna, and then later helping Beta to make acid to fight the Krotons. But there is a bit in the middle where he's basically a prisoner of the Krotons. This does mean that he's doing stuff, but nothing that really makes him stand out all that much. It's a pretty forgettable serial for Jamie, which is always unfortunate. On the other hand, Zoe is far better used by this serial, with really showing off her intelligence. She does spend most of the serial with the Doctor, which can often be the death of a companion, but in this case it works. The first thing I want to note is the scene where the Doctor and Zoe use the teaching machines, as this shows her intelligence and hints that she might be smarter than the Doctor in some regards. I like how it's her curiosity that gets her into this position, where the Doctor has to use it too, and that he just doesn't understand it as easily as she does, with him stumbling for a bit while Zoe just goes along with it. Which I think is both fun and a good show of her strength as a character, with her having a curiosity like the Doctor. But although it happens off screen, she does help the Doctor in finding a way to destroy the Krotons, which is a good use of her knowledge. It's a shame that none of this is on screen like with Fury from the Deep. This extended time with the Doctor without Jamie around really helps to strengthen their dynamic, which really hasn't been seen before, with them playing off each other in a fun way. Finally we have the Doctor, who is as always great. He doesn't really spend any time with just Jamie, and instead Zoe takes his place as the sidekick, which gives us a dynamic we haven't really seen before. We also get another look of the Doctor showing an interesting non-electrical science, which I think is great for this incarnation, as the idea of him playing around with chemicals and potentially creating explosions seems like something that would happen. There are a few moments where Troughton really shines in this one, but they don't stick with me as much as others. This could be because this follows up a serial that I really like and had great moments for the Doctor, and the ones in this one don't stand up against them right after, but I suppose it could just be due to this serial being a bit of a dull one. Something I want to talk about is an addition to the TARDIS, this being the Hostile Action Defence System, or the HADS, which as the name implies is a defence for the TARDIS to protect it where it's under attack, this allowing it to make a small hop to another location to escape the danger. Now I think this is a really cool idea for the TARDIS, having it being able to have a level of control over itself and giving it a sense of intelligence, which hasn't been touched on since Edge of Destruction in Season 1. It's one of the few times that they introduce something to the TARDIS which doesn't feel really gimmicky, and it's given a reason for why it's never been used before. Finally we have the writer, Robert Holmes, who is making his debut on the show. So despite this being his first story, he had actually been submitting ideas since Season 3, but had only now got one accepted by the production office. There really isn't much to say about him with this one due to how early this is, in relation to him being a writer, but given anyone who knows the classic era, knows he's worth bringing up. This also marks his first story with script editor Terence Dix and director David Maloney, who are members of the production team who he will end up writing a lot of serials with as the show goes on. So the Krotons is just a little dull. It's comparable to the Dominators being a serial which doesn't really stick with you after watching it. But I think that one had a bit more sticking power due to how silly it was, and that the Dominators were better characterised than the Krotons. It has a few strong moments and gives us a lot of the Doctor and Zoe together, which hasn't really been seen before, but it does end up sidelining Jamie as a result. It gives us a bit of lore with the TARDIS, plus it is the first serial written by Robert Holmes, although it's one of his weaker efforts. But it's a good enough first serial for him. And this season will bring another serial by his hand, and that one will be... well... we'll get to that. But next time, the TARDIS arrives on Earth in the near future, where rocketry has been sidelined for the TMAT system, but an invasion by an enemy of the Doctor's will bring Earth to a standstill as they prepare to invade. Next time, the Seeds of Death.